You're good.
All right. We're gonna go ahead and get this thing moving and rolling. So I know that on the program it says a day in the life of a positive youth, but that is incorrect. It's gonna be a day in the life of a youth navigating sexual health. So we kind of made a little bit of changes. So I wanted to kind of give a holistic view as opposed to just talking about positive clients, because we also see negative clients as well. And sometimes that journey may be very similar, depending on the youth. So guess I'm going to start getting these legs. So my name is Johnny. I work at RAIN. I've been working in the field for about 15 years now. I've been at RAIN for 4 years. I also have my counterpart, TQ, who's going to be here as well to present. TQ is our linkage facilitator. So he works with individuals that are living with HIV. He also works with individuals that are looking to access PrEP and help them navigate PrEP as well. Myself, I used to work with individuals living with HIV as well in a department called EIS. EIS stands for Early Intervention Services. So we go out and find individuals in the community that are not in care, find them, assess them, try to convince them to get back into care, and follow them for a year. During that year, we're training them to be self-sufficient so that when they graduate from EIS, they then go into greater case management and are not a tiny client. So they can pretty much navigate themselves. They just want the case management for backup. And then now we have a research program, a research department, we have a PrEP department, we have our EIS department, and substance abuse department. So all of those conduct our outreach team. So those are the departments that go out to the community and does testing and look for clients and try to find clients, assess clients, work with clients on a peer-based model to bring them in for services. So before we get started, look back for me. I just want to give you a little bit of warning. I sometimes have a lot of passion, and sometimes my passion overtakes my mouth. If that happens, just bear with me. Sometimes I stutter a little bit because my passion just gets ahead of me. But I want this presentation to be more of a workshop than a presentation. So I don't want to be talking to you guys, looking boring and blah. So you guys can work with me and talk with me, then it'd be perfect. So I wanted to present this first case study to you guys because I'm kind of want to get a little bit room and see what the knowledge base is. I know a couple of bases, and a lot of bases actually. So this is Eric, who's 22 years old, living with HIV. He comes to the clinic with complaints of an STI. He works part-time at a local restaurant during the day and at bar some evenings. He usually hooks up with individuals from Jack or Grinder. He is not an art and is scared to start because of commercials and ads on Facebook about pharmaceutical companies being sued. So my first question to you guys would be, what steps would you take to further assist Eric, who might need, what are the steps that you would take to further assist what Eric might need in terms of HIV treatment?
Well, I would want to ask him a little bit more about, what he's seeing on the Facebook and ads and stuff, about why he doesn't want to take KFC.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I think I would just start with more like before we just get to all that, we have to talk about the risk factors, like what he's engaging in, and start with, because you can't really get to that other stuff without knowing what testing looks like. So, just talking about the type of testing he may consider getting, what he's engaging in to see like where we might lean towards more things, and then talking about what he does know about like the AFTs and what he has seen and what feelings those are creating, and see if he's in a place to discuss them. Because if he's dead set against it, sometimes you just have to meet people where they are. So ask him if he's okay with you giving him like more information.
Agreed. Anybody else want to answer before we move on?
It's probably also talking with the peer, someone maybe his age who's also living with HIV, that he could talk to. I know when my diagnosis was important that, and that was 35 years ago, to talk to someone who I knew was positive and knew what to expect, and someone who had lived that experience.
That's right. I will actually do the same as well. What message would you give them around risk and prevention of STD, of STIs and HIV? We kind of already talked about that, but you did a very good job of mentioning it. Someone could have skipped that. The doctor prescribed ART. What would you tell them about taking medication, side effects, and adherence?
I would tell them how low the rate of side effects is,
Mm-hmm.
and the side effects of not taking the meds,
Right.
which are, we all know,
Right, that's right.
everything that's on down to continuing to have worse and worse effects from infections like STIs and other things, side effects. And if you take this one pill every day now, and don't really skip any ever, take them almost all the time, you won't, a few years down the road, have to be taking 3 or 4 pills a day.
That's right.
And that's when you start feeling sick.
That's right. I would definitely go over that as well. You kind of covered both of those, actually. So tell me some ways that you guys think that you can assist with retention in care. Keeping them engaged, keeping them keeping them with taking medication, keeping them going to the doctor's appointments every 3 or 4 months. We can even venture to say now we can do every 6 months, depending on the doctor, depending on where they're at in their HIV journey. What is the way that you think you can do to assist with that?
Some type of support network, like group therapy, that peer advocacy, getting them involved, linked up with that outside support, that wraparound support system.
Perfect. Anyone else want to add to that?
I would say also it's about like the rapport that you build with them. I think customer service is super important in every aspect of life. So if you make them feel comfortable and they can have an honest dialogue, so many people go to like doctors or health clinics and they don't tell the truth. And they hold back a lot, and it's just their experiences when they come into those settings. So we have to be very careful about the atmosphere we create, because we could be a barrier to their retention. And so I think keeping it a safe space where you're like allowing them to speak with honesty and not feel judged in order like to say whatever, say, hey, you know what, I hooked up last night, I didn't use protection, I don't like using protection. If that's okay, we have to change like our perceptions of what the right method of prevention is. It doesn't always look like what we've been taught. So
I appreciate you saying that. So one thing that I say a lot is that sometimes you sticking a condom down the youth throat is not the reality. It's not going to work. They're not going to use it. It's totally fine. If we train them to know what it means to be healthy sexually, that is going out and getting tested, that is going out and getting tested regularly, right? And when something does come up, knowing how to go get that treated. If we train them, then we are still being successful. The condom method, we can fall back on it, but in reality, it's only 82 actually percent a chance that come a word. So, there's other things that we can do that we
It's
talk
that
about.
meeting people where they are, and then also saying like, you can make positive changes that aren't necessarily what you think everybody's trying to shut down your throat.
Exactly.
There are other options.
There's other options, exactly. One of the things that I like to talk about is us knowing, I'm gonna get you a second, us knowing exactly what else is out there, right? So when we talk about prevention, there is a term called frotting that we have been doing for years, and it just got coined a couple of years ago, and whatever. And it is a safer way of having sex with 2 males. It's the hunching method, right? There's some feeling there as well, but a lot of kids don't even know about that. And what that means, they do it, just don't know that it can be a safer sex option. That intimacy is still there, and they can still kind of get off of that. You know what I mean? So,
Can you tell me what that is? Because I don't know.
yeah. So frotting is almost like swordplay. So how I like to compare it is when I was a teenager or a kid rather and didn't know what sex was. I would put a towel over my pillow and hump my pillow. So it's name on top of each other and that friction action kind of take over there. I'm gonna skip over this one because I don't want to spend too much time on this. I tend to talk about TQ shaking his head, but it's okay. Monica is an 18-year-old transgender woman who was living with HIV. Her parents kicked her out at age 16. She engaged in sex work to support herself and her basic needs. She is worried about recurring STIs and has been PPP for art. She admits that she only started taking art after 2 weeks of giving the script field and has not been very consistent in taking the daily pills. She has experienced very minor side effects, upset stomach, and is unsure about continuum. Whose decision is it to whether Monica should continue on art?
Her and her doctor, but mainly hers.
But I think Martha needs to go back to the doctor and share the side effects that she's experiencing and ask if there's something alternative she could take that would lessen those side effects.
Perfect. I asked that question, it's more of a trick question, because sometimes we get so invested in actually parenting these that we're not their partner in their healthcare. And so sometimes, ultimately, holistically, it's been, well, I'm not holistically, historically, it's been my decision. You want to take this pill because of A, B, and C, as opposed to, let's work with you and see why you're not taking it. What's happening? Let's figure something else out. You want to take you and call you every single day? There's other options that we can kind of dive into in order to get a better outcome. All right, this is the last one. Jonathan is 24 and has been on PrEP for the last 9 months. I think there's a typo somewhere in here, so we're bear with this. At the follow-up visit, he is in good health, and his repeat HIV test is negative. Jonathan reports recently starting a monogamous relationship with a man who is HIV negative last year and feels he might no longer need PrEP. Run into this a lot. First question: whose decision is it to whether Jonathan should continue on PrEP?
You're not that sure this yet.
But what message, before he makes this decision, what message would you give Jonathan regarding PrEP?
So, there's more information to be had, how active has the partner been since the last test. And something I've always told people, monogamous or not, I tend to err on the side of caution, just because you never know. Maybe you don't want to open things up. Maybe a night happens, something happens. You don't have to be in an open or not, exclusive relationship to engage with PrEP.
Right.
That's not a stipulation of it. It's just about feeling good, about taking care of yourself in that way. And so I would just tell them that the decision is up to you. I would gently suggest that you do testing and have a serious conversation with your partner and then make the decision that was best for you.
Perfect. My second question to you guys is, if this was flipped, this was a woman that was Jonathan was a woman, and it was Monica. And she's been taking PrEP. She meets a male partner. They're dating, it's been a year or so, she wants to get on PrEP. Would that conversation change?
I don't think.
I would try to address any power dynamic issues. Like, do you ever feel like, if I had her in front of me, that this is something that he's wanting you to stop? And so it probably triggered me to ask more questions about that.
Yeah. Because oftentimes what I've noticed is I see this in the more submissive partner, where they have to prove that they trust their more aggressive partner, right? So it's like, in order for me to prove to you that I trust you, I need to put myself at risk, right? We only do it with our love and our heart and all the other cushy stuff. But I have to put my body at risk to prove that I trust you enough. And those are the underlying issues that we have to come and have to dig into. Is that why you have to put yourself at risk in order to gain trust for somebody else, the sexual health. So I see this in, again, more submissive partners. And when I have a conversation about it, it's always around trust. Or I trust them enough, or I want them to trust me, and I want them to feel secure and things like that. And I don't have an answer to this yet, but I see that a lot, and I'm just trying to still kind of dive into what that is, what that looks like, and how can we change that narrative. All right, so we're going to talk about barriers. Now, this presentation doesn't go over all the barriers. As I was driving in my car and I took a shower this morning, I named like 6 others in my head. But I chose these 4 because these 4 are always the top of conversation when I'm talking to other individuals. So the first one is homelessness. Come on, somebody, talk to me about it.
Makes everything harder.
Everything. Every single thing harder. Especially now we're in a climate where rent just went up, mortgages went up. I don't even know how I can barely survive. I don't know how these kids are trying to survive out here. Working 5 or 6 jobs, trying to pay a $1,500 rent each month. It's weird. It's crazy. But things like this affect how they navigate through the HIV and or PrEP care system. How can they be focused on going to the doctor and taking this PrEP care? They're trying to figure out how to live. How can they make an appointment if they can't take off where they're working 4 or 5 jobs to support themselves in order to get to that doctor for them to rewrite the script? How they want to continue contact with their caseworker without a cell phone? Oftentimes we have where in the office, we rely on that individual to show up to the office twice a week. They have constant communication with that. And sometimes, depending on what happened last night, they may not come, right? We get bored and things like that, but we're literally, that's our only most communication with that client, is them coming up at the office, no appointment. We literally have to stop what we're doing, to do something totally important to make sure that we tend to this client, because we're not going to see them in a couple of days. But that affects their journey, they have their journey. So we're talking about mental health and how that shows up in our barriers.
Lack of providers.
Oh, yes, lack of providers. Stigma. Most definitely.
I've been thinking a lot about autism and ADHD and how that's underdiagnosed in the communities of color. That makes people more susceptible to acquiring HIV and then being on top of visits and not getting medication or treatment for it.
Often co-occurring with substance use disorder as well.
Most definitely. Yes, most definitely. And drug interaction. Right.
In our community. It's something that we don't believe that we could.
Exactly. What I will say before we go back to that is that I love this new way that the youth are on now, because they're getting it, right? I remember, and I'm not that old, I'm sure I'm not, but this new wave of mental health that these kids got nowadays is so, I love it so much. The language that we're able to use and comfortable with, the fact that there's celebrities and artists that are on top of it and talking about it, Black celebrity artists that are talking about it, is so important because the kids are not catching that. I love it. Before you know it, these kids will have us working 4 days a week instead of 5 days. I promise you.
Work on the kids.
And then we've already said stigma. You already brought that up. Is there any other ways that stigma comes up in barriers at all?
I mean, stigma, I feel like underlines everything we just outlined with barriers.
Yes, it does. Because it right with the night. This is a big one. So I know stigma, and this kind of ties in together, but I'm gonna separate this for a reason. Can anybody figure out or to guess why I separate the stigma and peer family influences?
I mean, also has a beneficial effect, because I have so many peers who bring their peers to see me, they bring their peers to see me, because they're talking about how it's actually a great place to be in, and how they feel comfortable, so they bring their family members and their cousins.
Perfect, right?
Well, it goes back to that trust piece, because once you are a trusted source. Yeah.
Well, think about it as a barrier.
No, so.
That's perfect. I love it. That's true. Let's work in that works.
I remember back to the lunch planner that we had when, or I think it might have been before that when she was talking about Black women. So when and HIV, when I think about it, I think about like how Black families do things like call, young girls fast and stuff like that. And how that message is constantly in our minds, like it's always on Black women or women to like take care of their health and their safety, even when it comes to like walking to the car with like keys in your hand and stuff. Like it's always on, the onus is always on them. And so like my question is, how do we eradicate stigma when we don't address this first? Because it's not just stigma from like the outside world, it's the things that we're taught at home and that like goes through generations. Like even when we're hearing these things from our peers and they're open-minded, it's hard. Like how many peer and people go home at Thanksgiving and Christmas are dreading these times right now because they're inundated with all this stuff from their peers and this warmth, and they have to go home to these families who don't respect identities and like, so I think for me, this is like where we need to shift focus on those because it's hard to eradicate some of that outside stigma if we're not starting within. Yeah.
And to even add to that, sometimes people are not addressing it because they've normalized it. It's too it's normal for them, right? And then if it's normal for them, it's easy for them to repeat that.
Yeah.
So it's just a cycle that's continuing going on. Another reason why is that typically if I'm 16, 17, 18, I can't do nothing without mom.
Yeah.
I can't do nothing without dad. So at some point in time, there's a conversation that needs to be had on why I'm going to the clinic. Or why, I was positive at the age of 13, the age of 13. And my mother and my father found out in the hospital room with me because they had to intervene and say something because I was a youth. And I didn't get the chance to come and talk about it. So that was my coming out story, my positive, my coming out story that I'm gay. All of it in one. I was like, oh my God. But those conversations I wasn't ready to have yet. Right. And so most times our parents does not create that place that we're talking about for us to have this conversation, to nurture those conversations correctly. And if they do, sometimes they're not educated enough to provide the right information. So oftentimes I'm not gonna do that yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm gonna break down the HIV health care continuum. So what I'm going to do later on in this presentation is go through each pillar and talk about barriers and how those barriers that we talked about earlier affect each pillar. Okay, so the first one is diagnosed with HIV. That is the first touch, right? That is their first interaction. That is the first thing that they're gonna that we see them as, right? So we're out testing. They've been diagnosed. The next pillar is registered care. Get them to a medical appointment as soon as possible. We want to get them retained in care, right? So sometimes there is a gap between here and here. We're changing that now more so than ever because now they're walking out with medication. But making sure they're prescribed ART, and then the last thing is making sure they're achieve viral suppression, right? So, do anybody have any questions about any of these pillars before we move forward? Good. Okay. All right, so we'll break this pillar down. So the first pillar again is diagnosed with HIV. So this has changed. It's 16 now. When the youth are under the age of 18, their parents must be notified that they're tested HIV positive. That was true in my case, and it's still something that is happening now today. I actually just had a client of mine who's actually 22, and they got into a car wreck a couple of months ago. Their parents was listed as emergency contact. The doctor gave her the recovery on the regular. She showed something positive. didn't get a chance to have that conversation with his mom. The paper did. She's not just asking questions. So that it was in itself not being able to kind of have a conversation on your own terms, kind of create that nasty, I hate to say interaction with that nasty start. You know, like, oh my gosh, now I have to deal with my parents on top of dealing with this. It's an easy way to kind of get somebody to deter from wanting to deal with the care system. You already lost my trust. The other caveat to this is that if they are on their parents' insurance under the age of 25, anytime that I go to the doctor and get something happening, my mother and my father is getting that paid. So there is no privacy there. They still haven't had a conversation at some point in time. This may create a little buffer because I think they get it a month afterwards. But I have it before then. And my mother doesn't pay attention to that bill. And depending on that youth life, one of the things that I hate to do is sum up that youth that are positive are all Black MSM. We do that a lot of times, that are often, and I do that naturally when I'm talking. So that's my experience and things like that. But I hate hearing that so much because it makes me cringe. That's not the case. But disclosure is difficult for youth due to their earliest stage of brain development and level of emotional maturity. So when I was in high school, I was, of course, again, I told you guys I became positive at the age of 13. So I went back to high school. And one of the things that I was nervous about, even if, like, their HIV didn't have to look, I was nervous that somebody would know about HIV. There was no way in possible these kids to know. But in my mind, everybody knew. So what I did was I said, I'm stepping in front of it. I'm gonna tell you before you tell me, right? So I just told my whole school, and we all was married. I had a good life. You know, it wasn't as negative as I would like to talk about, I would like to share. But it was a positive experience for me. But sometimes kids don't have that, and they don't have that safe bubble. They can't create that safe bubble because everything is so toxic. Kids nowadays, we are on this good wave of mental health. But kids are still toxic as hell, or the negative as hell. So sometimes, they don't have nobody to kind of talk to and share the information and bounce things off of like that. All right, talking about that. And this is another thing. We've had some regular fired individuals, and most times, average, it may not be the case for everybody, but they don't find out about their diagnosis until they're 13. They would take these pills all their life, their mom telling them it was vitamins or what have you. And then by the age of 13, when their body starts developing and things start happening, they start asking real questions, then they're having that conversation with them. Well, you have lied to me for 13 years. I don't know what you want me to do with you right now, So there is that barrier already there with the parents. The doctor's probably lying as well, because the mom must ask them to, so there's that barrier there and things like that. So they, again, have already had a negative experience with the healthcare system and do not have the support that they want and they need to succeed in their HIV journey. This is just the beginning. So the fear of being judged by their community creates that stigma portion where we at. And you touched on it earlier about internalized stigma. It is so real. And before we can talk about, so internalized stigma within the individual, internalized stigma within our community, and then external stigma from outside of our community. But so me as an individual, there's my community, and then there's the outside that is not affected. In order for me to work on me as an individual, I need to work on the people that are in my community as well. So we have to start changing the way that we talk to each other and the way that we use each other. There are so many times where I've been in support groups and the kids can't say HIV, they say I've been living with it. That bothers me so much. What is it? There's still a negative conversation towards the word it. So this is the portion where we try to empower them. Like, hey, if you were sitting here and you was living with diabetes, you wouldn't be able to say that, right? What's the difference? So trying to empower them to change their language, things like that, and change the fact that HIV is here, it is a part of you, but you are not it. So changing that, so sometimes I've also seen this as well, where HIV has, sorry about that. That's my unprofessionalism taking place. It happens. Sometimes the dead diagnosis will trigger mental health that was either unseen or undiagnosed. And we've seen it before. I've seen it just actually recently in the last year or so. And and there's a host of other issues that come along with that as well. Also, they're not able to cope with new diagnosis. They're not willing to seek therapy. There's so many times where we try to stuff therapy down the individual space to it's unreal. That is not helping as well. They're gonna turn away, they're not gonna want to talk to you. As a peer navigator, at that moment, that is the most safest place for them to be at, because again, they can bounce off conversations, bounce off ideas, with somebody that can relate more to them that's inside of their bubble. Let that peer have a conversation about therapy later on, because sometimes they may not catch right in the year. They may not want it until the next year or 2 years or so. I've seen individuals that don't, I've been working at Rank for 4 years, start working with them at year 1. They just now decided to do therapy 4 years later. I'm amazed. And then youth are not, youth may not qualify for housing programs because they do not meet the definition of homelessness. Anybody, can anybody talk about that? Anybody talk about that?
Yeah, they're couch surfing, they're not homeless.
That's
by
right.
that standards.
That's right.
You got friends as a young person, you're not sleeping outside.
That's right. That is crazy to me, because my friend is not a guaranteed place to stay. Not to mention, my friend don't know what the skills are, and I know this. I'm Google something real quick. You know what I mean? And that is not okay. It's even hard to get you in the shelter because of this. If they're couch surfing, and somebody else is on the street, you can't get them in the shelter because they're couch surfing. They had to last night. They had a roof over their head. So we want to move to the next pillar, which is literacy care. Having to hide the diagnosis, not having a social or not having a support network. So linkage to care, I want to assign with that first medical visit. Having to go into that doctor's office or clinic alone is already traumatizing enough. The doctor's office don't really, other than Lehman, don't really have any youth-centric department. They don't have any youth-centric programs, things like that. So they're being treated as an adult when they step into that clinic. Signing these papers, not knowing what the hell they're signing, not really reading the actually stemming through. So partnering them up with a navigator to help go with them will benefit them and actually extend their network. Going to support group will extend their network. Now they can bounce the conversation off, bounce off that experience rather. I'm sorry. And then we're going to stigma. So there was a client that we had back in the day that would not go to the front door of the clinic. Nobody's gonna see you coming in, nobody's gonna see you coming out. We had to call the nurse, we had to get relationship with the nurse. And the nurse would allow us to walk him back to the back of the building and let him leave so that he's able to be seen. That was my first experience doing it, and I appreciate that nurse so much for allowing it to happen and making it happen. She didn't have to do that. But she understood that in order for us to keep this youth right and good and clear, we have to do whatever we need to do to make sure that he's actually got back to the doctor. People didn't wait in the waiting room. She didn't want to see nobody or was scared to go to somebody. They didn't want to see him. Mental health disease providers are aware of client care in the mental state. So oftentimes, if they're going to a atrium or something like that, and they are seeing a mental health doctor and they go to a clinic, sometimes it takes a while for them to get their medical record before they're able to prescribe art. So they're walking out with pills, not even aware that they have mental health issues or there's something that's going on with them on top of HIV So, sometimes that can be a barrier, that something, when it's prescribed wrong, something happened, and we're kind of backtracking and trying to figure it out. I haven't seen that run into that yet, though, but I can foresee that being a problem. Also, youth are not aware of how to deal with chronic illness. We're not talking about it in school, we're not training them on the back end on how to deal with it. We're going to talk about health, we're going to talk about sex, let alone HIV. So this is a complete shock and surprise to them. And what we're doing once they are diagnosed and are being linked to care is that we are literally, again, backtracking and trying to do what we should do on the front end, training them to be successful on the back end. All right. Of course, you have this idea of being invincible. So when a person becomes undetectable, they feel like they don't have to take the medicine anymore because I'm already meeting what I need to be meeting. And or we have these things called non-progressives. Y'all sure I've heard of that, right? Non-progressives. So sometimes they can go to the clinic a couple of times and not take medicine. I had this female who was I guess considered a non-progressive, but she was undetectable for about 3 or 4 years without taking the medicine. And for the love of me, we could not tell her. She wouldn't listen on why she still getting medicine. Things like that. Until Dr. Johnson, love that name, literally broke it down and said, you can think of your body as a house. You go into that house and turn on every single light on. And keep it on all day, every day. When you're not taking medicine, then that's what you're doing to your body. So you're running your light bulb up. The light bulbs are going to come old. They're going to blow at some point. What the medicine does is you going in to each room, turning each light off to preserve the lifeline of that light. And that is the only time she got it and stuff. It makes sense. And I love that now. I use it every single time I can now. Or every time that I can, I try to use it. And then of course, a lot of programs aren't youth-centered. You get into survival relationships and survival sex. So sometimes when they have had a conversation with the LGBT community, parents are not okay with that, so they get kicked out. When they are couch surfing, sometimes they are in survival relationships to sleep on that person's couch. Survival meaning they have to do something strange or change to sleep on this person's couch. We've had a lot of our youth, because of survival sex, then we get introduced to drugs. Then get introduced to the new rate that's taking place now over the last 3 or 4 years is meth. So we've seen a surge in meth in our youth in the last 3 to 4 years. And I can really only link that to survival sex and then we introduce to that way. All right, moving on to the next pillar, which is engage and retain and care. Again, back to that lack of family support. I'm not being able to talk to somebody about their experiences, not being able to talk to somebody about the things they're going through. Not being able to have somebody go sit in the clinic with them and help navigate that and talk to that. The stigma portion, reinforcement of taking medication. Working with doctors who aren't sex positive. When I tell you that has been an issue for the longest. Actually, my doctor for the longest time, it's been in this field for a very long time. I would still say that he wasn't sex positive for a long time. I would hate to go to tell him that I had some sex a couple of years ago. He was like father to me. Right? I looked at him like I've been with him for years. As you know, I'm positive for 14 or 15 years. But I would be afraid to tell this man that I'm not having sex. So that may have been in a trauma state of mine that I was nervous about. It may have possibly had to do with him. But I was just afraid, and that was what I just remember that feeling. A lot of times you have that same feeling when it comes down to the doctor. So we get into that mode of not being able to be truthful with that doctor. We get into the mode of not being able to tell the doctor that, hey, I popped a Marley last night too, or I'm doing coke every now and then, things like that. We get into that mode. So we try to again link them to a youth navigator so that they can tell the youth navigator and then we can kind of guide that conversation. If at many times I'm the doctor and I know this client is using, of course I put the relationship before I do this. Talking about medication, talking like this. they on more or something like that. And I said, hold on. Is something that you say? No, what you mean? Oh, so are we really doing that? Is that what we're doing? What you talking about, Johnny? Okay, so you don't have my face. So, and then they go ahead and disclose. No, that way that they're, I'm not saying it. If they give me a hard no, I will stop. You know what I mean? But I at least want to at least try to push them a little bit. Have a conversation. And it's not because I can't, I'm successful. It's only one person that I met that I was not successful with. They almost fought me in that document. I was okay because I was on a good fight. That was years ago, though. I remember like yesterday. And then of course, you not let those hand in hand. You've not been able to hold a conversation with the provider about their STD, STI, or sexual health history. Mental health, you're not allowed them to prioritize their health. So like, what's your name?
Mm-hmm.
And like Emily was saying earlier, if they have undiagnosed things that are there, their attention span is focused on something totally different. How are we going to keep them engaged in this when we can't even keep them engaged in other things? And then we see this a lot is where youth are not necessarily being trained on how to be stable when they get high. That is becoming an ongoing issue. So we get these youth in these houses and these apartment complexes and set them up. They bring 875, but we have not trained them on financial literacy. So if they become unstable, now they got an eviction on their record. Now it's harder to house them the second time. And because of all of that, they went from being stable for a good 2 or 3, 4 months to being unstable. Where does this fall in line? What does the healthcare fall in line? So there's an instability there. And then the last pillar, we're going to talk about prescribed art. So I haven't read into this one in a very long time. And it was only one time, which is family belief system, people simply taking their medication. For example, her medicine or the silver capsule. I've only read into that once ever. But it's a thing and it can happen. So when people, are not able to take their medicine, they can't take their medicine. Also, one of the things that I remember too as a kid is that my grandmother and my mom used to beat me over the head about taking medication. It was so aggravating. Like I had to call me everything. Like they literally taking medicine. You just can you mom you say HIV first? Like you know what I mean? Like so it was there was that care component that was there, but the conversation was missing. You know what I mean? So like I thank you for being so concerned, making sure I try to take this medicine. But we haven't seen had a conversation about my diagnosis, about anything else yet. And sometimes that affects me. Sometimes there's like that you can't pick and choose what you care about. There's a holistic component here that I want to have a conversation with my parents about. And I can't not allowing that space. Thank you for the reminder of the deal, though. I appreciate you. Good. Then there's this stigma, afraid to take medication in certain environments. I remember, again, I'm going to reference myself a lot, so I don't want to put all my clients out. But not being able to go to sleepovers, to my medication at night. And I made a subconscious decision when I became positive that I would never go to nobody's house. Because I did not want to have to take that pill out, and they wanted me to come and take it. And then I took mine with the vitamin. I fed my vitamin into applesauce. So it was a whole process for me. So I didn't want to explain that. And that period before going to anybody's house, by the time I was 18, I was pretty much, I had friends, but I just wasn't close enough to individuals like that because I didn't have that experience. So that can be a thing, and sometimes when they do go to somebody's house, they're not taking the cake, so they skip that day. Mental health, again, mental health medication may interfere. We already talked about that interaction. And the transient youth don't have a way to store their medication. So again, I'm homeless. Where is this medication going to go for me? I've seen where somebody can store these people and they think it's something else, or they're going to sell, or use that only HIV medication. So they don't have a way to kind of store it. All right, and my last pillar is viral suppression. All right, so going back to that first peer family support influences, parents are not knowledgeable of what undetectable is. So they still haven't hit kids, y'all, for we get our plastic forks, plastic plates, not sharing rags or rags away and things like that. I actually just heard a story not too long, actually, the day before yesterday, about an individual, a CNA was going to her family's picnic or cookout, and she brought her patient with her. And the patient was very vocal about her being HIV positive. So she said that though, they gave her plastic plates, plastic ware. They went into the kitchen and it was saying, y'all make sure that anything that she touched go away, things like that. It was that real. This was literally 2 weeks ago. And she told me about it 2 days ago. So yeah, this is still happening. Still happening. The youth forget that to stay violently suppressed after continue taking their HIV medication. I also ran into that before. I was 18. I was violently suppressed, and I was like, okay, I'm good. I don't need to take this no more for a good minute. That caused me to gain a resistance to a medication in a trip, which was the first regimen that I was on. So when I decided to get back on medication, certain things I couldn't take because I had a resistance build from something. Not being able to keep up with the medication with that is a repeat. Also, going back to the community and stigma, sometimes, a lot of times, communities still have not gapped for undetectable equals untransmittable HIV. So we're still fighting that battle on the outside of our bubble, and knowing what that is going to look like. All right, so I'm gonna bring TQ up and talk about the PrEP care continuum.
Can anyone tell me what PrEP stands for?
Exposure prophylaxis.
So here we're going to look at the healthcare continuum for PrEP. We're going to look at the sexual contact, navigation, counseling, linking, and retention. I promise y'all will not be before you all on like Johnny. Here we are still looking at the barriers. So if you can look, you will see the peer family influence. As I begin to talk to a lot of you, I find out they are not knowledgeable on PrEP. They are not knowledgeable on HIV. They cannot go to their parents to talk. It's just so hard. For myself, I come from a Christian-based background, not utilizing that as an excuse, but we don't talk about sex. The only thing I know, I cannot have sex until marriage. But we don't talk about the use of condoms. We don't talk about going to get tested. I don't know, it's just very hard. Peers tend to misinform others about sex. If you're not talking to someone, where are you getting the information from? He say, she say, Google, the internet, that's not reliable information. If we look at the stigma, the community does not know how to engage the youth. It's so hard to talk about sex. I just can't walk up to someone and just say, hey, what's your sex life about? Do you utilize condoms? Where do you go to get tested? Untreated mental health can increase risk. Youth get involved in relationships and engage in sexual sex. As I stated, youth are afraid to talk with family about their engagement in sex. Others thinking you have something because they are inquiring. If you walk up to someone and say, hey, what does STI mean? What do STD mean? What is HIV? People may think, oh, well, do you have it? You know, it's so hard for people to talk about sex and the STIs without being judged. Mental illness might not allow them to prioritize their health. No access to obtain information. If you're homeless, you don't have access to those resources. 9 times out of 10, you don't have transportation to get you to the clinic. 9 times out of 10, you don't have a phone to contact someone. You cannot Google this information. So counseling is the big barrier in transportation due to homelessness. I'm nervous. I don't like progress.
You're doing great.
I'm just kidding.
You're doing great.
All right. No support system. When you are under the age of 18, their parents must be notified
they're scared of the result. You have the idea that they're invincible. A lot of programs aren't youth-centric. Going back to stigma being scared of the result. I know I myself, now that since I've been working for Rain about 8 months, I'm no longer afraid to go to the clinic and get tested. And I'm 26 now, but when I was in undergrad, I will go get tested, but not as frequently as I should. And when I did go, I don't care how hot it was outside. I would have my pullover on and I would have something to cover my face because I was scared. But if I was taught that at an early age, maybe it would not be so difficult for me to go get tested. So basically, going back to what Johnny said, if you are under the age of 25 and your parents have to be notified, being judged by the community and peers, families, you're not being comfortable with going to the clinic and being afraid who they'll see. Mental health medication might interfere with you taking drugs, and no place to safely store medication. Little to no support, new relations, PrEP not being taken properly. I myself is on PrEP now, and what helps me is me working at Rain. I take my medication about 9 o'clock every morning, and I know I'm at work. So I know there's no judgment. Even when I do go on vacation, I'm still on that 9 o'clock, knowing that we just had a long night, we all drunk, everybody's still in the bed, so I can take my medication. So that are some ways that I have overcome those barriers to help me stay on my medication. Not being able to keep up with the medication due to instability. If you want to stay in here and you're homeless, then that's not the first priority in your mind. As he stated, you're worried about where you're going to lay your head the next day. 9 times out of 10, you might not have a book bag or anything to store it in. So those are barriers as well to why individuals do not stay to care and take a break. All right.
Thank you so much, TQ. Give me a hand, y'all. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about was this HIV continuum thing. So most time, prospective clients, the first time that we see, as it relates to PrEP, the first time that we see a client is when they've had an exposure. It may not be always, it may not be 100%, but this is most times when somebody come in and find out about PrEP. They had that scare factor, something scared them. Then we get into navigation. The navigation is them searching for a place to get tested. Where can I go to get this information? We're going to the counselor. They found the place, they found a place to get tested. We're going to the counselor. So they come into the office, they get an HIV counseling, they get an STI counseling, and we're talking about PrEP. Then we link them to PrEP, and then we get them retained with PrEP. All right, so this right here is a behavioral component that I want to talk about a little bit. And I only got 5 minutes. I'll talk about it. So if we educate the youth on the front end, right, give them a space to have conversation, real conversations about what they're experiencing, because at the end of the day, I was 13 when I became positive. I was already having sex by the age of 10. So that there was no way for me to have a conversation with anybody that was an adult for me to get that counseling portion, the STD, STI counseling, the sexual health counseling. Those are things that are missing. We are still behind the curve as it relates to individuals starting out with having sex. Stigma reduction. This is going to come with that. If we start the conversation earlier, we're going to be able to reduce stigma. I'll tell you why, because if we cannot have a conversation about sex, we cannot have a conversation about HIV, and STDs and STIs. So we have to, by doing these 3 things first will help us get to this point. Then we got harm reduction. Being able to prove away the harm reduction. You know, people are anticipating in drug use, finding ways to get them to a resource, to get clean needles and clean resources so that they continue to take this and do it safely. And then intervention. Creating interventions for our youth, right? Mental case management works for adults, it does not work for the youth. And you need to be able to text, you need to be able to FaceTime, you need to be able to get in contact with their peer navigator when they want to, however they want to, so that they can help navigate the conversation and navigate how to conduct themselves. Like there's a training component in that as well. and then adherence. If I gotta text you every single day, I'm willing to do that. I have an app on my phone that's gonna tell me to text you so that I can text you, take the medication. And then they'll call me, I took it, and text me, I took it, and send me a nasty check mark, because I'm doing the nurse. All right, so the PrEP plan, right, is identifying, because it's awareness. Again, it's following that same behavioral continuum thinking. Individuals, identifying individuals for testing, what we do out in the outreach team. HIV awareness, enhancing PrEP awareness. This is the outreach component. Facilitating PrEP access, linking to PrEP, prescribing PrEP, and initiating PrEP. All of this is the navigation and the medical component. Then we have over here the same navigation and medical component. So these are the things that TQ this is how he operates on a day-to-day basis. And then we have the HIV plan, which is very similar, right? Identifying individuals for testing, increasing HIV awareness. We do that, we get them tested, we find them positive. The uptake, facilitating testing access, linking to care, prescribing art, and then we go over here with the medication, medical and medical case management, and or the navigator, prescribing art, achieving viral suppression, and retain those individuals into HIV healthcare. All right, I'm gonna skip over this because I want to talk to you about this last portion. So I'm skipping over our research. We can talk about that later, and I can send y'all that link. So finding different ways to educate the client, our youth in particular, or how we want to be successful in our youth, right? So talking to legislation about let's get into school, building a curriculum. That's going to start off at the age of 3, 4, or 5 years old. We're talking about not necessarily sex, but gender identity, exposing them to a Barbie doll and a football, right? We get there. We move on to about 8, 9, 10. We start talking about the anatomy. Don't touch don't touch my eye. No means no. Consent, what that means, right? Then we go to the 13, 14, 15, 16. We can start talking about sexual choices, sexual health care, talking about what health sexual is, what it look like. And so we have the tools and curriculum to do this. I don't know why we can't get into the schools, right? That would be a complete curriculum on how to conduct sexual education into the schools. Engage. So we cannot continue to you get these apps on our phone, not engage with you. So middle case management, peer navigators have to find ways. So again, what we can FaceTime, what we can talk to you, what we can check in whenever we need to. We now have transportation on that is app-based, where we can get a lift to the person's house, get them to medication, get them to their appointment, and bring them back home. They have the option to navigate that themselves. You send them the link, they press the button when they're ready, press the button when they're ready to go home. So being able to kind of introduce that into the youth plan. And then empower. Again, this can be so small, but means so much, right? That words of affirmation, telling them that they are loved, that they can find love, things like that. Telling them that it doesn't have to end here. I like to tell people that this is your story. I'm just a pen. Help write it for you, right? And so just those little things, but able to keep them engaged, keep them educated, and will empower them to go out and do bigger, better things. For me, I was empowered by Lady Van Chelsea at Raymond, and she empowered me to come up here and do this. And work in this career. That is my truth, and I know that this method actually works. So I'm gonna stop right here and ask if you have any questions at all. I challenge you guys to reconstruct the road for our youth. Let's guide this up, let's help build this on the front end. So whatever you guys can do, whatever we can do together, let's figure it out so that we can make our youth successful moving forward.